Hey everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. Today on the show, I am sitting down with Lindsey Boylan. In December of 2020, Lindsey became the first woman to publicly accuse former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo of sexual harassment. Her courage set off a political firestorm. It led to a statewide investigation, and it ultimately led to his resignation as governor. But now, despite everything, just a couple years later, Cuomo has come crawling back. Now he's running for mayor of New York City. And Lindsey is sounding the alarm about what type of person he is and talking about the systems that enable men like this to continue pursuing power. That means we go beyond Cuomo. We talk about the Democratic establishment itself. We talk about people like Joe Biden, Bill and Hillary Clinton, Kirsten Gillibrand, Hakeem Jeffries, and so many more, and how they have navigated allegations of misconduct within their own ranks. We're digging deep, talking about things like party loyalty, for-profit media, and just name recognition of some of these guys and how that can leave survivors sidelined in the pursuit of justice. Lindsey literally said that she felt like she was a human shield for other people within the organization. This isn't just a partisan story. This is not about left versus right. This is about how institutions on both sides will go to great lengths to protect power, even if it comes at the expense of vulnerable individuals within the organization. And of course, this whole story is about Lindsey's courage as a whistleblower, sharing her survivor story and all of the ways that that has impacted her for good and for bad. I had a fantastic time talking to Lindsey on this episode, and I know you're going to enjoy listening to this conversation as well. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Lindsey Boylan. All right, Lindsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, really excited to chat with you. And obviously, as I shared in my intro, you first publicly accused Cuomo of sexual harassment in December of 2020 via a series of tweets, which led to a major investigation, his resignation, and just a lot of swirling controversy since then.
Obviously, in a highly political matter like this, there are many agendas and there are many motivations at play. If anyone thought otherwise, they would be naive, and New Yorkers are not naive. But I want to thank the women who came forward with sincere complaints. It's not easy to step forward, but you did an important service. And you taught me, and you taught others an important lesson. Personal boundaries must be expanded and must be protected. I accept full responsibility.
Take me back to that period when you're pressing post on that first tweet. Do you have any indication of what the next few years were going to look like?
No, I think it's impossible to. And in a way, it's kind of, it's kind of like childbirth. It's better that you don't know. You don't know what the process is going to be like. And I certainly didn't. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing that. I had been, generally speaking, critical of the governor, increasingly so. And I think that was a way to kind of unburden myself a bit without going into specifics, because when you say sexual harassment as opposed to just tough environment, it's a very different thing in this day and age. And I couldn't have been prepared for that. I think I was sitting in the car with my family, as I recall, and my husband was driving, just started tweeting. So it wasn't even like I was, I sat down at my desk, I got all prepared to like blow up my life and New York politics at the same time, so to speak. It was, I thought a lot about how troubled I was. A woman had reached out to me. I'd spoken about the toxic work environment on Twitter. A woman reached out to me, Charlotte Bennett, who would ultimately become the second one to come forward. And she explained that she was sexually harassed by him privately in a DM to me. We spoke. I really felt responsible for what had happened to her because she came after me. She's significantly younger than I, and I felt responsible for, what had happened to her, because if I had stopped it, it wouldn't have happened to her somehow. And then he was being touted as a potential pick for attorney general in a Biden administration. So being in politics, I knew that was a balloon they were floating to see if there were really big problems with him, like sexual harassment. And so this had been percolating in my mind for a few days between this outreach I received from a survivor, Charlotte, and then hearing this news, and I just didn't even think. I certainly didn't have a plan that would have to come, a way to kind of react to this news coming out and the onslaught of attacks that I would receive. I had to kind of get my ducks in a row, but I wasn't prepared for anything that was about to follow, for sure.
We're going to get back to today's episode in just a minute, but first, this show is brought to you by BetterHelp. October 10th is World Mental Health Day, and BetterHelp is recognizing all of the therapists who have helped millions of people in their healing journey. I know for me specifically, having a safe space to talk through some of the biggest transition periods in my life was such a game changer just about a year ago when I started using this service. I was able to find a licensed therapist on the platform, and they are committed to finding the perfect match for you. I saw this firsthand. The first therapist that I found was not a good fit for me at all. I was able to quickly, within the app, change and request a new therapist, and that person ended up being absolutely incredible. Trust me, I was skeptical. I didn't know if I'd be able to find something that would actually truly be helpful, and I certainly did. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform with 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people served. And the sessions average a 4.9 out of 5 rating across 1.7 million client reviews. So this World Mental Health Day, we're celebrating the therapists who help millions of people take a step forward. If you're ready to find the right therapist for you, BetterHelp can help you start that journey. And my listeners right now get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/preacherboys. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/preacherboys. All right, let's get back to today's episode. I've talked to many people over the last 5 years in various stages of similar experiences where they're about to come forward and they're nervous, or they've gone through the civil system or the criminal justice system. And some of those people I started talking to in 2020 when their cases started, and 2025, they're just wrapped up or they're still ongoing. And many of them have said to me, if I had known all this, I don't know that I would have reported, or I don't know that I would have even started a civil suit process. And I'm wondering for you, looking back, would you have clicked post knowing what you know now? Like, do you have any kind of sense of, man, I've been through the ringer?
I would have. And I think I'll address kind of what the things you're hearing, because I hear them too. And I get it. I would have. I wouldn't be me if I hadn't come forward. I think my whole life, we all admire certain things. We all focus our lives in certain ways, what we think is admirable, what we focus on, what we fixate on. And for me, I always, for whatever reason, was constantly asking myself, like, would I be brave enough in difficult moments to do the right thing? I don't think I'm a perfect person. I'm definitely not. I'm a human being. But, in these moments where it matters, would I rise to the occasion? And for some reason, that question has always really animated my life from a very young age. It makes me emotional thinking about it. And so I don't think I would be me, because that was such a moment for me where I felt like it was necessary for me to do that. So there was no other option for me. Now, I do want to address the idea of litigation in here. I decided not to sue. I felt like my coming forward, my speaking out, my being deposed, my going through this process of accountability, that was enough for me. 3 women who are survivors of Andrew Cuomo did decide to sue, to have settled for, have settled with the state for damages. And one is going to go to trial. And I have been pulled up in those cases legally. So I have been pulled through the court system, even just as a potential witness. And that is a heinous system. It is not survivor driven. It is not trauma informed as much as people like to say it is. I have been traumatized by that system, and I am not a plaintiff. So I can completely understand why people feel that way. And I don't judge anyone for feeling like they wouldn't have done that a second time. Now, that being said, I think it's important for all of us, even myself, just as an ancillary party to cases as a witness or potential witness, to talk about how bad the system is and how re-traumatizing it is, because that's the only way to change it. So I wouldn't do anything different. I would love to not have these have been my options.
Yeah.
But they were my options, I felt at the time. And it was a process of pain and trauma and grief and growth. Would I have liked to have known what you really should have in order before you speak out, which is something I do talk about, which is writing down details, proof, descriptions, extemporaneous, or moments where I had told people these things that happened to me in my life. So that was all ready to go when I spoke up. Yeah, that would have been great to have ready. It would have been great to have an attorney, because I didn't realize I needed one, even just to speak my truth, which I did. So I wish I would have been better prepared. And that is something I get asked to talk about a lot, and I'm always happy to, but I couldn't be me. It's one of those moments, we all have them for different reasons and at different moments. And it's a lot about what, our value systems perhaps, and what we grow up with. But I just know that I was always in my life, and still I'm always asking, like, will I do the thing that is required of me? Especially when it's difficult. And I do think that was what was required of me.
I think I'll circle back, because I do want to get some more input from you on how to prepare before speaking out. I think that might be a great way to close the episode. But I want to get into Cuomo specifics here. I was talking about the fact that I was doing this interview with a friend of mine, Rhea Bravo, who wrote a great book called Complicit. She talks about exposing Charlie Rose, and she just echoed to me. She's like, Cuomo wasn't just abusive, but he was also an awful governor who mishandled a lot of things, notably the COVID pandemic. But then there's 13 plus women that have all come forward and talked about this abuse that he carried out within his circle. How does he still have support? And I know this is the question we could ask about a myriad of political leaders, but why him specifically? Why does he still have so many people that, go, yeah, yay, Cuomo?
I think particularly in the political arena, you see in a lot of different sectors, people have these fans, these supporters who kind of just endlessly do whatever they can to support and smear victims. But I think particularly in the political arena, we have become so accustomed, because of the way campaigns work, the money behind it, the American story of drama, cinema, all of it, where we kind of build up these archetypes of what are supposed to be heroes. And it really draws people in. And I will say, in the case of Cuomo specifically, CNN had him on regularly, and other stations were airing his news briefs during COVID, and they were painting him like a hero of people, as an iconoclast to Trump. And so and we wouldn't, in my view, have Trump as president if he hadn't been built up by I think I blocked it out mentally, but the show he had,
The Apprentice.
Yes, The Apprentice. I mean, we build up these figures, and they make a lot of money for news media, so there's a reason why it's being done, but we build them up. And so, of course, they're going to have people who will follow them through anything, like super fans. And they really will follow him through anything. I mean, it's a dwindling number. I will say that, because I'm usually kind of like Zoran Mamdani. I really identify with what he's had to take in coming on in terms of smears and attacks, because it's pretty much the same people that I get smeared and attacked by. It is a dwindling number, and I think less and less, fewer and fewer serious people are a part of that. But the super fans, and they're predominantly, it has to be said, women. Predominantly women, in trolls online, for example, that are always just flocking to him. And the majority of, I would say, super fans of Andrew Cuomo are women. And I think in the political arena, it kind of, the way that campaigns and American politics build people up creates this dynamic. And I also think particularly, survivors they're all sorts of survivors. There's no one type of person, unfortunately. In this case, we're talking about women being abused by Andrew Cuomo. And I think that a lot of women don't want to see themselves as being able to fall victim to an abuser. And so it's less painful for them to think that we're all lying than to think that someone who they have entrusted their faith, their protection with, could be doing these things. And so in a lot of ways, I find that a lot of the super fans of abusers are oftentimes, coming from a place of self-hatred. And I've seen snippets of that sometimes. And I think that's a common experience with survivors being on the receiving end of hatred. It's the most virulent people are often people who don't want to accept what's inside them.
Do you think there's also a portion of this in the political sphere when it comes to parties, especially when you're, working alongside someone for a long time, or you're in their orbit for a long time, where there's almost something of a blend of a sunk cost fallacy of like, well, I couldn't have spent that much time working in that organization with someone so high up being corrupt. Do you think there's a piece of that there as well?
Yes. And the other part of that coin is I've invested all of this time in this person. And if they go down, where are my stars?
Yeah.
And I think you saw a lot of that, not perhaps publicly, at least for the same reasons, but with Biden, I think a lot of people stuck by Biden in politics because if he doesn't stay in power, then all the people who built their entire careers around him, they may perceive themselves as kind of screwed. And I think that's also, there was never really a true investigation, but, women did come forward with really bad experiences with Biden. And those are really shut down in a very early way, I think, for some of the same dynamics at play.
I want to talk about that because one of the things that comes up all the time in the political sphere, like I talk about Trump a lot because he rubs shoulders with evangelicals, and I talk about evangelicals. So that's going to be a lot of the focus. But a lot of times there is this whataboutism. It's like, well, what about Biden or what about Clinton? What would you say to the people that are going like, okay, well, now it's a game of, well, they're less bad, like, well, Biden is less bad than Trump, but there are these serious allegations here, or, whatever, fill in the blank, or Trump is less bad than the Clintons, because then some people go like, I go to the ballot box and it looks like everybody's got allegations.
A sexual harasser.
Yeah. It feels a little concerning, that's the state
it is concerning. And I think, one thing that I feel pretty good about is I've never shied away from focusing on both sides of the aisle. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm still a Democrat. And I came forward with allegations against a Democrat. And so I do feel like there's an opportunity there to say, listen, this isn't about party for me. And, I end up speaking about Andrew Cuomo a lot because he won't go away. He happens to be my abuser. He happens to be trying to lead my city. But I speak about the other side of the aisle just as much. I try to shy away from conversations around more or less bad, not because there's not some truth in some cases that I have not experienced rape. And I would never want to minimize that kind of trauma that a survivor would face. And so do I know that there's a big difference between that and workplace-based sexual harassment? Yes. I also know that because one is more extreme doesn't mean that the other is less bad. And I also know there's tons of people who want to run for office and want to break through. We don't have to put up with, candidly speaking, the majority of which are old men from another time who spent their entire political careers in an environment that degraded women, degraded people, and fostered abusive environments that allowed predation to happen regularly. And I do talk frequently about women survivors, but I want to acknowledge that men and trans people are just as vulnerable. It just happens very frequently that many of the men in power have been men and have been heterosexual in many cases, but that doesn't preclude who a survivor is.
I was just talking to someone in a prior interview today, and they were talking about, people get offended when you say, men, or you say Protestant men or WASP women or whatever the label is. But they were just saying, if you can hold on past the label and just look at the trope, there's this type of person. And I think there is a type of person who grew up, in a normalized environment where this is normal. It is normal to have something on the side with a secretary, and that's the way it's framed. But we don't have the conversation about the power dynamics in that relationship and what that actually looks like. And so there's a level there of like, you can understand how some people get to certain points, but also it doesn't justify the action continuing once you're made aware of what this is.
Well, I'll
And
give
I
you an
think,
example on the other side. I took my daughter to a play. She's grown up very aware of Me Too and very aware of what happened with me because it was on the front page of newspapers, right? And I'm a politician, so I talk about it and I try to build something positive from the trauma, right? So she's very aware. I took her to see a play. It was it's a recast of the Scarlet, is it the Scarlet Letter? Anyways, it talks about grooming in high schools. And I turned to her during, I said, this is what they describe as grooming. It was a teacher doing that. And she said, I know what grooming means. Like I was like 10 years too late in sharing this with her. And I have an 11-year-old. So
mm,
and they're learning boundaries, physical boundaries. They're being taught things in the schools and in film and in culture that we were never taught. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know how, you've told me a little about how you grew up. I certainly know I wasn't taught. And so we can say it's not fair to typecast people and not to generalize too much, but we can absolutely say that certain generations there was a pervasiveness of this kind
mhm,
of abuse of power, and that's what it is.
yeah,
And that younger people are being equipped with more tools, maybe not necessarily to fight it, because you can't fight this kind of abuse of power alone, but to identify it,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is so interesting going back in hindsight to prior. I'm a huge fan of film, so like I'm constantly watching, like from 1920s silent movies. I'm trying to get people to watch with me, and through the years, and it was really interesting. I started watching through a lot of the Dean Martin movies.
Oh
I
yeah.
forget what kick started that going through that filmography, but it was almost like every movie, it's like, well, that movie was kind of charming and interesting, aside from like the explicit rape scene that's played off as a love scene in this movie. And the amount of films, or Sean Connery's early Bond films, where it's this moment of
Yes.
resistance before they give in to this aggressive push, towards
Yeah.
sex. And it's like, there's a lot from like comedies to drama, and it's never played in a way where it's menacing, and
Yes.
like just that is so interesting, the way that perspectives have shifted around consent and considering the female
Huge.
perspective at all. Like it's really, really, I mean, it's concerning, but it's also great to see the progress we made talking about these things, to where an 11-year-old
Yes.
knows, hey, that's not okay, that feels a little weird, why are they
Sometimes
doing
she's
that?
teaching me.
Yeah.
Sometimes she's teaching me, or I'll be like, how I was taught, oh, give this person, your family member a hug or whatever.
Hmm.
uh, Maybe I shouldn't be like pushing her
Yeah.
to physically engage, and I have to retrain myself in that
Right.
way because that's not how I was raised. And so if that's me and we're talking predominantly about, at least in my experience and the politicians we've mentioned, the generation or so above us,
Oh.
think about that. And again, this is not an excuse, but it is very much important, in my view, to talk about sexual harassment, sexual abuse, abuse of power in a broader context of culture. And I think that's where it's helpful.
One of the things that comes up a lot in a lot of your interviews is the name recognition thing. This factor is so important. Whether we're talking celebrities, we saw this in Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, where you've got a really well-known name,
Yes.
a really well-known name, but one is certainly more universally known, and the power and gravitas that has. Um, you were talking with Mehdi Hassan in May of this year, and brought this up, and you said the two reasons that Cuomo does so well is the amount of money getting flooded into his campaigns, and the name recognition. For someone who's outside of New York politics, what does the name Cuomo mean to voters there? Like, paint the picture of
Yeah,
how big that name is to
sure.
people listening.
Well, I think it actually has a lot, it predates him. This is really about Mario Cuomo. And my dad is from Queens, son of Irish immigrants, grew up very nearby, actually, to the Cuomos, just not as well off, but similar immigrant stories. And Mario Cuomo is known as the liberal lion. He almost ran for president. He almost had, without the Bill Clinton, public misdeeds that we're aware of, had that kind of aura about him through his life. He was a beloved figure in the Democratic Party, particularly the New York Democratic Party, but he was also a national figure. And he his campaigns were from an early point in Andrew Cuomo's career. In part, he was the strongman behind his dad's campaigns. He was pulling the strings, particularly where kind of the strongman pieces were. The more tactical, I would say abusive, tactics were run by Andrew Cuomo from an early age. But that name recognition is multi-generational. He also has a brother, as we know, who was on CNN for a number of years. This is a prominent, dynastic political family. He married into the Kennedy family. So this has been, a very well-known family. And then he was governor for all these years. And then during COVID, he was on TV all the time as a foil to Donald Trump. And he was very effective at getting coverage. And he was also very effective at silencing critique. So all you would see repeated again, again, and again was his name. And he had been very focused on, really putting his name on everything that he builds, not that he built, but the state built, and things that, any of his team, any of the agencies would work on, he would put his name out there. So it was really ubiquitous in New York politics. And so there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party, I think it's kind of Clinton-esque in that way, that will stick with a bad guy they know, simply because they know him. And there's a perception that on certain issues, he will toe the line.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what that's been about. I will say, I was fearful that when he first got into the mayor's race, and I knew he would try to, claw back to power. I just didn't know when and how, that would be the overwhelming story heard and again. And he did try to do that, right? He tried to lean into the history. He talked about his father a lot. He went to the traditional churches that he would always go to, like the mainline establishment places. But there was enough pushback and enough consolidation of all of these people, myself and other advocates, organizers included, and good candidates and a good process in ranked choice voting, that you could compete with that name. And I think the longer he stays in this race, the more that historical legacy name is crumbling. I think now it's kind of an embarrassment for most people. Yeah. Which I can't say I don't enjoy. It's that would be lying.
Sure. Yeah. The name thing is so odd to me because it is something where, I think it's the trope of the person going in the ballot box and voting for the name they recognize the most, Yes. And I think I was guilty of that. The first time I ever voted, I remember you're like, okay, this person, yeah, I know them. Check, check, check. You have like three people you know a lot about, or at least you think you know a lot about. And then it's like, city council, sure. I'll just
don't be
down.
hard on yourself. Yeah. People who are not in politics should not have to live their lives in politics. In most countries of the world, people get the day off to vote. And we don't. Yeah. It should be a national work holiday. And actually, this is where I have to fault my own party as much as the Republicans. Establishment politicians who are in office don't necessarily want you to come and vote. They don't want high turnout always because it may not be predictable in their favor. So, and wherever early polling sites, and particularly polling sites ultimately, and voting legislation, registration, closed primaries, all of these things typically get designed to support the people who are in office the way that they want to be supported. So, I am not, and I don't agree with faulting anyone for falling to that. Now, I don't want the system to stay like that, and I have hope that there are some things that are changing. But I don't fault. You shouldn't have to live. Politicians are supposed to help make your life better. Yeah, we're not supposed to be people. Politicians are not supposed to be people that you're supposed to think about all the time. You know. Right. Gross.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, the name recognition side is strange. And I think it makes it hard for the average voter when they see people that they clearly do know some things about that are concerning. I saw this in the Democratic race, just this past election cycle. It was bizarre to me as someone you could run circles around me if we had a quiz show about politics, but I feel like I'm I try to be more informed than the average person. I think that there's like,
I'm
I would be
sure.
one of those people that thinks like, I know a little bit more than I did know before because I've tried to research it. But then you see, you know, Kamala getting endorsed and touting the Cheney
Uh,
name behind her,
that was,
or parading Bill and Hillary
yeah,
Clinton on stage. And it's
yeah.
like, is the name worth the damage that it's doing to someone like
No.
me where, I was quite supportive of Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, but
Yes.
seeing those things did chip away at my, like, why are we putting a Cheney, like that name should be poison to anybody's political,
I, you are not
campaign.
alone. I had
Uh,
the same reaction, and I'm a lifelong Democrat. I think, another issue that we're running up against here, and we also see it in the Cuomo Mamdani,
yeah,
face off is for far too long, the powers that be in the Democratic Party think that the way to gain support and get more than they have in terms of who is in our tent is to go moderate. And I think that is
yeah,
such a misnomer in this time when the biggest issues people have are with it's not even affordability, like wondering how they're going to make their lives work.
yeah.
So many
Survival.
people
Yeah.
don't see many of my generation will never own a home like their parents did. They'll probably the biggest nut of wealth transfer they'll accumulate is when their parents pass or when their parents sell their house. So it's living on borrowed time, so to speak, in terms of our expectations for the future.
Yeah.
And then we have AI that's going to be coming after jobs. We have environmental issues that are increasing at a scale we can't predict. And then we have all these people who Silicon Valley, they're with Trump today. They're getting what they want from him, but they were with Democrats the day before and touting Kamala or whomever we want. And they're all saying, you need to moderate. And I think we're having a moment where it just is not working. And the message is
Mhm.
it's like total dissonance. And I think, at least for me, when I hear you say that, that's what I think about, because I had the same reaction to both the Cheney piece and the Clinton piece. It's like, what? Why are you going here? Fine if Cheney wants to come outside and support Kamala for all these reasons, let her
Certainly.
do that. But you don't need to go and show up here with her. And I don't know that Kamala would that done that on her own.
No.
But she certainly
The
was.
establishment
They
pushed
pushed her to
that.
do that, and
Yeah.
I think it was such a mistake. I
Yeah.
think all of that kind of moderating in this moment in time, when that has nothing to do with the concerns that people have in their real lives, is a complete mistake.
You said one quote that I thought was really interesting, and we can wrap the name recognition side of this, but you said on a podcast recently, Andrew Cuomo is just like Trump without the money. And I thought it was a really funny sentence, but I'm curious if you could unpack that a little bit and what that looked like practically in your experience with
Yeah.
them.
Well, even for years, and I mentioned this, people would ask me what it's like to work for him, because he's a huge figure in our party, and a huge figure in general. And I think part implicit in that question is he seems like kind of a bully. Even when people would ask me that years ago, before the sexual harassment, like, what is that like to work for him? And you kind of see he's not really an appropriate person, at least in my view. That's part of the implicit question. And I would say that, he's just like Donald Trump. Just one has a lot more money and different letters next to their name. And if the person was curious, they would kind of ask more. And I would say, I mean, how he treats everyone, including women,
Mm,
sometimes. And I wouldn't go any more, but they're both they abuse power, and I'm not even sure that their sexual harassment or sexual assault is about women as much as it's about power.
mhm,
They both have daddy issues. I've read, books on both of them, living up to their fathers. They both have a lot of skeletons in their closets. They both came of age in a time in New York where um, it was really rough elbows and like pointed shoulders, so to speak. And they both came a time where a certain kind of traditional news media was on the rise. And so they knew how to like take advantage of that, particularly the 24-hour news cycle, TV news. I have heard, I've only been in the room with Donald Trump, I think once or twice. I've never actually met him, but obviously he's our president. And so I read extensively about him. I followed, all these things. I read one anecdote that someone had been, a very high profile finance guy in New York, had been accused of battery against his wife. And it was in the New York Post. Something like this. I'll get the details wrong, perhaps, but that the next day, this guy got a call from Donald Trump saying, congratulations. Basically, all press is good press. And I just have never forgotten that story because it's so illuminating. And it is, in a way, so like Andrew Cuomo. He would do anything for press. And he relishes this kind of, pushing down of other people. And I think in many ways, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, they both, not only did they come of age in the 24-hour news cycle in terms of their professional lives, but they capitalize on that. Cuomo and COVID, and Donald Trump with the Apprentice, and they're always, they're not afraid to be extreme and verbally abusive and attack others. I mean, Donald Trump was at Charlie Kirk's, which that's a whole different topic. I don't even know if we have to, but he's at the memorial yesterday after Charlie Kirk's wife says that she forgives the person who shot and murdered her husband. He says,
I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I am sorry, Erica. But now Erica can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that that's not right, but I can't stand my opponent.
That is a sitting president of the United States taking this moment to say that. That's just like Andrew Cuomo, too. When he ultimately left office because he was going to be impeached and he resigned, he has since spent years attacking all of us for telling the truth legally. I've spent millions of dollars at this point in terms of legal fees just to defend myself. He uses his campaign funds that were left over from governor to, attack us in the press, and now Mamdani. And so it's this, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to practice without a degree, but it's an unwellness, and it's the same kind of unwellness in my view.
I was going to mention, Cuomo may not have as much money as Donald Trump, but he certainly has access to no small amount of money. Like
lots of money.
Campaign money.
Yes.
And then also has spent $60 million of taxpayer funds.
Probably more like, I don't even know how many millions it is now, but that was in, I think, March or April. So just imagine how that number has risen.
Keeps climbing. Over 60 million is a fair yes. phrase. Defending himself against lawsuits relating to COVID, but obviously 47 million of that, at least at the time of the latest reporting on it, was towards sexual harassment claims specifically. And, when I read those numbers, I sit there and I watch the interviews and these puff piece interviews with local New York stations. I look at even the way that the New York Times covers him, and you go, a governor spending almost $50 million in aggressively going after people who've come out about sexual harassment. This should be on the front page every single day of this election cycle. This is one of the most powerful figures in New York politics, nationally known name. But then the questions are all about, is Mamdani too socialist? It's about, is this other candidate here, which are all fair questions to ask a candidate, but yes. You don't hear anything about this right now, like, why do you think the press is so off the gas when it comes to this conversation?
Yes.
Why do you think there's not more talk about the financial side of this? What do you think that is?
A few things. First, I felt I see the same thing. And so I have unfortunately made it my job to remind people. So the day he announced, I came out with a Vanity Fair piece that was ready to go. I made the agreement that the day he announced or thereafter, that piece would be released, reminding people about this man. And it came out. And so I have spent my time that way. But I would love to have not spent my time that way, because One of the many reasons I decided not to sue is because I have a life to live and I have ambition and dreams and things I want to do, and they don't relate to this man. And so the less I have to have my name continuously associated with him, especially my abuser, the better. But I don't have faith that media is holding him accountable alone. And I don't think they would have writ large. And I'll go into why now. I don't think that is because of the journalists themselves. There's a few things going on here. One, unfortunately, in journalism or in news media, let me say that, not journalism, there's always this singular appetite for new. So when I'm reminding people about things that have already been reported, they don't want to report on it unless there's some new hook. So the times where you see what he has done reported, it's because there's some new information. So that's just like a structural issue largely in news media. And that is why I have also found that I need to go back and do that, because for whatever reason, there's usually a lane, if I go on a show and explain something, they're like, okay, well, this is her. She's coming on and talking about this now. And I'll do that if that's the way this has to happen. But they don't want to report on things that aren't breaking news. That's, I talked a little bit about this breaking news cycle, 24-hour news, and that is certainly a part of it. And I think it's an unfortunate thing because that means that people don't naturally get reminded unless campaigns do it themselves or survivors do it themselves about the misdeeds of politicians. So there's that. Secondly, none of all of this happens without, and I think it goes back to this issue of the crisis of where we are in this country, monopoly. I think whether we're talking about media, we're talking about tech, we're talking about the consolidation of food production in this country, you're basically talking about, in any industry, just a small number of players making decisions at the very top. And at the very top, those are being run by individuals who are even more powerful, even more wealthy. And I think that is the same thing we see with owners of the Atlantic, New York Times, the Washington Post. I mean, look at some of the things. Oh, you're not going to weigh in on presidential elections, Washington Post. Oh, you're not going to weigh in on certain types of elections, New York Times. Oh, you're going to, write smear pieces on Mamdani at the Atlantic or at any of these other papers. Follow the trail up the chain, and you will see the same issue with monopoly and with, frankly, a small number of really powerful, really wealthy men who have all these incentives to stay with the devil they know, so to speak, Andrew Cuomo. And so I think that is a big part of it too. Those are the two things I think driving this issue.
Right. Well, I mean, we obviously saw this on the national stage with, companies wanting to pursue a merger and getting pressure from the FCC. I mean,
exactly.
It's not an issue of like every journalist that works for ABC News,
And I want to draw that distinction because they're being told, their headlines are being rewritten. They're being told what one of my friends, Karen Attia, was just fired from the Washington Post for speaking out essentially about Charlie Kirk and his treatment, just specifics about it. And again, this is another case where Andrew Cuomo and Donald Trump, in my view, are very similar.
Yeah.
What just happened to Jimmy Kimmel? We're talking about the same dynamic at play, the same media players, the same monopoly, the same oligarchy, and the same small cast of characters in politics that they're promoting and supporting.
Yeah.
Them abusive ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask one more aside question that I didn't prepare ahead of time, but I definitely feel deeply what you're saying about, the only way this gets brought up is if, survivors themselves often are footing the bill to get the message out there, whether that's the emotional bill or the actual bill for putting this out here. And it's journalists pursuing stories like it's not going to be these mainstream media outlets, again, drawing a distinction between the journalists who are really trying to get these stories out there and then the money that goes beyond that. But I also do feel, what you've said, you don't want your name to be attached to this person for the rest of your life. You don't want to have to talk about it in the rest of your life. And so as someone who's asked you to talk about Andrew Cuomo, because I think it is a story that needs to get out there and it's not being pursued in the public, how do people like myself, dig out these stories and try to, platform voices like yours in a way that is not exploitative or in a way that is not dragging you back through this traumatic ringer all over again? What
Well, a
would you
few
like to
things.
change there?
It's a great question, but few things. I do not think you're doing that at all. And secondly, I always prefer to have conversations with someone who is trauma informed, and no one is going to be more trauma informed than a survivor themselves. And so, I don't remember the situation, but a few years ago, there was a rape survivor who was banned from covering, I think, the Epstein cases. And to me, that was such a disgusting perversion of journalism because she's exactly who could actually elicit genuine answers from people. Oftentimes, what you're seeing in journalism is people speaking on the record and allowing readers to, assess the veracity of those statements. So it's not as if you can't report because you have personal experience. And in fact, I don't want to talk to a journalist who isn't going to be respectful. So that's the first thing. I actually prefer to talk to people who have personal experience or have somehow conveyed to me that they do. It makes it that much better, and it does not make me feel used. I think one blessing that I have received in this time period is that with him running again, which at a point was my worst nightmare, has become such a triumph because I have been able to use the skills that I have. I'm a politician, so I'm on the shows. I'm, communicating the points. I'm doing community organizing. I'm building coalitions. I'm actually doing a lot of the things that I have the skills professionally to do. I'm getting to communicate. It's enabling people to see me in a different light again, that I'm good in different settings. So what I was most afraid of, again, being tied to this man and him winning, has not turned out that way. So if I could offer, because I never want to be, I want to always offer hopefulness because I feel that way about life. This has been a redeeming experience that I did not expect because I've been able to use my skills. Now, I've also, in doing so, been able to build my confidence back in certain areas. And so now if someone did a piece on the legal bills and they're like, what'd you think? And I'm like, it was a great piece. I prefer not to have people use accuser in like describing me because of so many things. But one, there were 3 investigations that found he did these things. So when you headline with an accuser, it doesn't give it the provenance that it deserves. And I know that you're concerned and your legal department's concerned, but find another way to say it. Call me whistleblower if you don't want to say, survivor or victim, whatever. But I have been able to push back in these intervening years because I went through this process of trauma, pain, grief, acceptance, all of it, and now in certain ways growth. And I don't think I would have been in a position years ago to push back and negotiate on the terminology. And so I do feel like in my small part of the world, I'm having an influence on that. I don't want to be called an accuser. I've done way too much work. I've been deposed multiple times, including my last deposition was last week,
Right.
in one of the cases. And so I will talk about this as long as it is necessary. And the further away it gets from me in my past, I'm not sure. I don't think my future looks like never talking about it. I think it's too much a part of who I am now. I think that there are too many people who reach out to me with hope and with fear and with needing advice. I thought that I'd be like, okay, I'm going to now go back to my real life and not do this. And it's just not what it's going to be. And I don't want that now because I feel so thankful of the survivor community that has really uplifted me and trusted me and been with me. And it's, as I think you and I both know, way more number of people than ever come forward. I don't want to run away from that. And I think it took me years of trauma therapy. I always like to mention trauma therapy because I believe in it. It took me years to get to that point. So I don't think I am going to ever stop talking about this, but I think increasingly I'm doing it with power. I'm doing it with my ability to push back on narratives, which is, I hope, helpful in the broader context of survivors and change. And then also using it for good. Like if we're going to talk about what work looks like in the rest of the 21st century, how we treat people is going to be a big part of that. And I never really thought about what I went through and what I continue to go through in the broader context of that. But the number of people who come to me needing help or advice or just to commiserate, I'm not going to stop talking about this. I hope that that clown isn't part of it.
Yeah.
but now I feel differently about that place, that piece of my life. And so I feel better about it. I feel more confident.
I am curious with people like Senator Gillibrand who, in 20, and this is what's really mind boggling is like, it's not like, oh, this story from the 70s and we can put, because my favorite apologies are 30 years ago, I did this, like distancing yourself from this moment. This is 2021. This is 4 years ago. And she was saying, due to multiple credible sexual harassment and misconduct allegations, it's clear he has lost the confidence of his governing partners and he should resign. And just a couple months ago, this is a country that believes in second chances, and the voters are going to have to decide. So you go from this, I wouldn't even say it was strong condemnation, but condemnation to, well, it's up to people if they want that or not. And second chances are a good thing, like why this, and this isn't the only one. This isn't the only about face that's happened here.
No.
There's been plenty.
Hakeem Jeffries, all of it.
Why this passiveness in this situation?
Well, I think they're afraid of him. I think one of the biggest signs of how abusive someone is when powerful people themselves are afraid of them. And that, I think I've never seen a better example than going back to Andrew Cuomo and Donald Trump. You know that you're facing a powerful abuser when powerful people are afraid of their abuse. And that is why she didn't speak up. She didn't want the blowback from him, his people, his supporters. And so she thought, I'll just stay on the sidelines and it won't be a big deal. But it's a very big deal because she's built her career on supporting survivors.
Yeah. Hers is, that's why I included hers because it's particularly frustrating. But do you think do you think they're hedging their bets that like, okay, he might get back into office?
Yeah.
And that's it? And
they were.
Yeah. Okay.
I think they were. And I think how convenient, how privileged to be that powerful and hedging your bets against someone. So basically what that meant and what that has meant is that I was a human shield for them. I and the other women were literally human shields for these people who didn't want to stand up, because then we had to, she's like, oh, I'm not going to get involved in this. This isn't my place. I'm going to stay on the sidelines. Okay, what do you think he's going to do next? What did he do next?
Yeah.
Start smearing and attacking the very women he sexually harassed. And I like to be very visceral about it because that's how it felt emotionally. I am a human shield for Kirsten Gillibrand, and that is disgusting.
I believe you said that there were some people in one of your interviews said there's some people that hate women and some of those people are women. And I'm interested in this on two levels. One, I'm really, really perplexed, like in patriarchal systems, that some of the loudest voices are women, whether we're looking at, in churches where, women are reinforcing that like women shouldn't lead. And so you have female leaders that are pushing that narrative, in an ironic way. But I'm also really like fascinated by the fact that you're obviously a very intelligent, great at your job. Like you're not, I think the perspective people have of cult survivors, sexual abuse victims is that like, this person is not intelligent or they're a doormat or they're an easy prey. And we know that's not the case. Like there is no perfect victim. There is no perfect, they open themselves to this. Powerful women are finding themselves in the orbit of this predator. Why do you think these guys feel confident enough in themselves to surround themselves with some of the most powerful women in the country and think that they're going to get away with what do you think the mentality is there?
Yeah, well, I'll just share also one anecdote that not everyone saw during the primary. Stephanie Miner, who was the mayor of Syracuse, New York at the time when he was governor, actually shared that he forcibly kissed her in one moment. And that was exactly what had happened to me. And she was the mayor of Syracuse. Yeah. She was a rising star in the state party. So I don't think it gets more kind of insidious than that kind of
The
example.
boldness of that is just,
yes,
yeah.
they're so bold. And people say, how was Kathy Hochul and all this? He wasn't nice to her. He didn't know how to be appropriate with women. He just treated women that he found attractive in a different way. So in a different kind of abusive way than women he didn't, think about that way. But it was all kind of inappropriate and mean-spirited and abusive and harassing in one way, shape, or another. So there's that. But, I think the more distance I get from this, it is so sad. It is clearly so sad when you see women say, well, I wouldn't put up with that, or that, that's just how it is. Because deep inside, if there's any self-reflection, this is coming from a place of there's nothing I want less than to be her.
Yeah.
And I felt that in my life. I have felt that. And I think that's why I like to take the time to talk about it. Like, oh, I don't want to be her. I don't want to be put through what she's being put through. And you have to find a way to rationalize that couldn't happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
That you couldn't be victimized, that you couldn't be harassed by an abuser. But let me tell you, I was a very senior, very powerful woman, and it was no easier for me than if I had been a secretary. Because for me, it was humiliating to have this happening, right? I worked so hard. I went to Wellesley College. I was student body president. I went to Columbia Business School. I had all these perfect jobs. I was always doing well, in terms of the professional ascent and working very hard. How humiliating to have the person who you worked for split time between treating you professionally and treating you like shit, like a Barbie doll. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, like a Barbie doll.
Yeah.
And I think it's scary for people to think that could happen. Or the other thing that happens with certain people who are so against this is they were sexually harassed. They were abused as a child, and they don't want to think that this has anything to do with that. It allows them to stay in their lives, in their lanes. I mean, I think Clinton's a great example of this. I mean, what was he doing preying on whatever the dynamic was with a 24-year-old intern? I have had tons of 22, 24-year-old interns work for me. That is such an abuse of power that those two would even find their way in the same space. I don't care what else you say.
Right.
But there are so many people in our party that had to rationalize Bill Clinton for far too long because that's who was in power. So there's that larger dynamic and buy-in. And then I think it's this deeper, either it happened to them, with women where they can't accept that it's happening again, that it's happening with their favorite, that it could happen to them. It's such a deep-seated self-hatred, and that is a tool of patriarchy, is to make women feel that everything about them is wrong.
Right. What's it's that shame dynamic. I know in religious circles where, well, I'm not pure in that context, this was damaged and the shame is put onto you. And I think culture has a lot to answer to that. I mean, I think of Monica Lewinsky, specifically, every late night host was jumping on the bandwagon, making jokes about her.
Yes.
And of course, there was people impersonating Clinton but I think the majority of people were projecting the shame onto her.
And that was my middle school. That was I think my elementary to middle school years.
Yeah.
That was my first experience of politics.
Yeah.
And then I was a congressional intern in high school. You can bet that I did not want to see any similarities.
Yeah.
So it works that way,
Well, and you mentioned, you've had interns that are 20-something-year-old and the power differential there, and you were not president of the United States, like it's like, now imagine that dynamic and how much further that goes. Like it's hard looking with the goggles of understanding these situations more now and then watching these clips and how it was presented at the time. It's
heartbreaking. I mean, I talked to most of my interns and they're like, oh, I'm moving on. I have a new boyfriend. I live in a new city. I got my master's. What a betrayal of trust to totally disrupt all of those dynamics.
Yeah.
I mean, it's heartbreaking for me to think about, honestly, and to see how, not even thinking about one individual. It's just like, how dare you abuse the public's trust that way?
Yeah.
It's such a precious thing that you should work to try to, I don't always get it right. I know I don't. And I'm sure I've had to apologize, like, oh, sorry, to one of my interns, sorry, I was grumpy that day. But like, to do the opposite is just so gross.
Yeah. Well, and to create a culture, versus
Yes,
like
the
a
culture.
moment, like there are moments that all of us are abusive to one another in the context of lashing out because we're upset about a deadline or something. But there's a big difference between that moment and creating a culture of abusive behavior where that is the status quo. Like
And
that
it's
is what
always
you're
the
doing.
culture.
Right.
That's the culture. And I think far too often now I'm kind of like, listen, let's not give Cuomo and Trump too much credit, because there are all these systems around them. And I like that we got into media as one of them that enables it. There's all these other people in culture, and to your your experience in talking about certain church environments, the same thing. And, I grew up Catholic in the Catholic Church. There's been a lot of sex abuse that we all know about, and that was enabled by the Catholic Church for far too long.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's the same thing. It's men in positions of power. It's, and we could get into a long diatribe about Cuomo speaking in churches just a few weeks ago.
Oh my gosh.
And who's being platformed in these environments. But I am curious, as we get near the end here, looking ahead, obviously this isn't a political show, but I am curious myself, so I'll ask the question. What do you make of the rumors of Trump reportedly helping Cuomo with this New York race? Is there validity to that? Do you think that's kind of a little tinfoil hat like?
No.
Okay.
I wish. No, I think so. They do. I knew when I worked for Cuomo, because I had read, not the books that he wrote himself, not the book that he wrote about himself, because that's, BS, but the books written about him. I think The Contender by maybe a Vanity Fair writer. It was a very good Michael Shinerson, something like that. And it talks about Cuomo in the early years. And I found that instructive when I worked for him. And I think maybe in that book or somewhere else, I mean, Cuomo and Trump knew each other. I think he sent a video back to Cuomo's bachelor party. They go back kind of in the same way that the Epstein-Trump world, this, little swamp, goes back. So they do have an existing relationship. And as much as they may battle back and forth, no other politician helped Cuomo build his national profile more than Donald Trump as a foil. And so then they do talk. When Trump was first elected, Cuomo went and met with him in Trump Towers. And so they have existing lines of communication. And I think for Cuomo, he is very much trying to do that behind the scenes. They share a donor base, so it's very easy for them to get in touch. And actually, there has been reporting that the Mark Penn and another pollster who have done work for, I think Fix the City, but don't correct me, like, don't count on me on that, but have no Cuomo and no Trump, and have the same kind of support base in this moderating Democrat world and now Republican space, met with Donald Trump to say that Cuomo was the best chance. So there is that Trump knew that this was the best chance to beat Mamdani. His perception was Cuomo from those meetings, from donors and high profile donors that he knows. I think it's absolutely something that Cuomo has been back channeling, in my view. And I think Donald Trump, do I think it's his biggest issue? No. Do I think he likes to play in New York politics, where he's originally from? He likes to treat places like real estate holdings. I mean, it's how he talks. I think he absolutely has tacitly considered how best to help. I mean, it's originally, I think we all know why the Eric Adams charges with prejudice went away, as I understand it. He was trying to make it possible for someone else to beat, Mamdani, and or even earlier than that, for Eric Adams to, focus on running for re-election before it became clear that Mamdani might be the best way to beat him. So I do think that is absolutely happening. It's not tinfoil. Do I think Cuomo is relying on it discreetly much more than Donald Trump is probably likely to actually engage in it.
Yeah.
Mainly because I think they both know at this point that the more Trump engages in it, the more harmful it is to Andrew Cuomo's chances, which I actually think he has next to zero chance of winning. And it makes me very happy to know that.
Okay. Well, my next question was, do you think he has a chance of winning? No, I was going to say,
I don't.
He's
Unless,
the underdog.
Listen,
yeah.
Politics, in politics, anything can happen and usually does. I can't remember who said that famous phrase, but it's true. So you never want to discount. I'm doing canvassing. I've maxed out to Zoran. I am doing more canvassing. I'm doing a lot of organizing with friends and folks in anti-Cuomo work. I'll probably be doing a few more media things to remind people of Andrew Cuomo. So the work still needs to be done. But now, in the primary, Mamdani didn't have the establishment. He didn't have the borough-based parties supporting him. Now he does. He has the unions supporting him. So all the people that were the kind of mainline strongholds that were, holding on to Andrew Cuomo in the primary, and whatever that power that gave him, whatever numbers that gave him, have all, for the most part, moved away from him and to Mamdani. So he's doing all the things he needs to do. He's got an increased coalition. Does he have Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, Hakeem Jeffries coming out and supporting him? No. But at this point, I'm not sure they're really going to help him. I think his name recognition, his campaigning, his retail politics are way above anything they could offer him in terms of support. And so I think it's next to zero chance that Andrew Cuomo can win. But we should never act like that for those who are organizing in the space.
Yeah. There tends to be the sin of just going off of polls and thinking everything's in the bag, and then letting the hand off the reins, for the rest of the period. So, this has all been so helpful. I said at the very beginning, I wanted to circle back to this, as I struggle sometimes with how to even brand this show to people, but I've really centered around, I want to be essentially survivor-focused true crime is, I think, the genre that it's in. There's tons of listeners to the show that are survivors themselves, some who've come forward, some who have not. If you could go back to 2021, Lindsey, and tell yourself a piece of advice, get these things in order, keep this in mind, what would your advice be to that person and to all the Lindseys out there listening to this?
Yeah, well, first I'd send love, because I do have so much love every time I meet someone, and I don't want them to feel alone, because you're never alone as much as you feel alone. And I have felt very alone at times. And I wish I didn't. So I can tell you most of the experiences that people have had, at least in terms of the public profile aspect of it, you're not alone. I've been there. But I would say, I had never had an attorney, first of all, and I needed to get one. So this whole world was hugely different for me. But the first thing I tell people to do is remember the things that you've probably tried to forget. So all of the ways that he sexually harassed me, all of the emails, all of the examples I had, all the texts I had, I mostly tried to obliterate those out of my life as they happened, because it was traumatic to think about. So when I initially tweeted, I then had to come back and actually try to rebuild forensically all of that information. I had to go to my mom and say, hey, did I ever share it? Did I ever text you? A lot of the emails that I had were from my mom. I didn't save any of that stuff because it was traumatic to think about. And in trauma, we do different things, but one of the things that I would do was avoidance, right? So obliterate, avoid, delete. And so it took me a while, and it was difficult to come back and start to forensically say this happened, and then with details. So I first came forward on tweets, but then I did a Medium piece. And so came forward in, I think, December 20, and then did a Medium piece that I released in February 2021. So in between that time, I was putting all of the data together, and there's a million ways I feel that I was sexually harassed by Andrew Cuomo and this toxic work environment. The things I've shared are the things that I could put details behind as proof. And that is a very specific kind of thing you need to do when you're saying something in the public or for legal reasons, right? If you're going to sue, or if you're just going to be deposed, or you're going to have someone investigate criminally, whatever it is. And it was emotionally hard to go back and do that. So if you could predate everyone else knowing that you've been sexually harassed, and you've come forward by actually saying, hey, I talked to so-and-so when this happened. Do you remember I talked to you about this? Amanda, or friends, family members, and then get those details and find dates around them. When was it that I was on the plane that he said, do you want to play strip poker? I had to go back and figure out what the dates were based off of a certain number of things that I remembered.
Yeah.
So if I would have been able to do all that before I came forward, it would have been less traumatic and I would have been in more control. So that's the first thing I would do. Go back and put details in order, accounts that you told people in your life, because that is proof. If you told someone, he said this to me on the plane, 5 years ago, and they remember that you said that, that's part of your proof. You need to get those things in order. Now, depending on what path you might take, I would highly suggest even at the very least, having a consultation with a lawyer. Now, again, we can't not talk about this type of thing without my privilege. I am comparatively a wealthy white woman with a big platform. So I understand when I say these things, everyone doesn't have access to. But if you do, getting, at least a preliminary advice from an attorney is probably good. Now, you may be thinking, I don't want to sue or I don't do this. It's just good to have someone. I had my lawyers review the forensic details that I had, right? Because they're thinking about it from a proof standpoint. So putting the details in order, having a consultation or a conversation with someone legal in your life. And there are all sorts of organizations that should be able to help in terms of not having to bear a lot of cost around that. And there are organizations that help you fund legal fights like this. And then I would say consider who you're talking about in hand. It's always going to be someone powerful in some context. In my case, it was in the political world. Keeping your circle very small on who you can trust. I think you will be surprised by who comes through and is on your side, and you'll also be heartbroken maybe by who doesn't speak up and come to you. When I had to do, and I did it too late because I was running for office at the time, I couldn't just delete all my social media, and I wasn't going to because I didn't, I'm a politician, but I would think very carefully about going off social media if you decide at a certain point you're going to come forward, so that you don't have to see any like smearing stuff. And I stopped reading the news for the most part for better part of a year, and I'm an avid news reader. So staying away from information that you don't need for the time period if and when you do decide to come forward. And there's a lot more that you can and may want to do. So if this is sounding overwhelming, I'd say the first thing you do is you reach out to a survivor who has gone public. And I have never had someone say, oh, I don't have time for you, I don't want to talk to you. They're usually very willing to do that. So if all this seems very overwhelming, maybe the first step is to talk to a survivor. And I have never never say never, but I've never encountered a survivor that I didn't feel like I could trust. I wouldn't go around telling your story to a bunch of people until you know what you want to do with it, unless they're really trusted folks in your life. So those are the kinds of early things I would say.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, and for sharing about this in general. And like I said, it's something that has really bothered me in the last, it's lately, it bothers me every election cycle, as we go into November this year.
There's always some abuser. You're like, what is this?
Well, and even seeing, I saw a video on the sidewalk of Anthony Weiner trying to get on city council. And it's like, you just went to prison and you're climbing your way into this. And it's just, it's the audacity is what you think about. But then, it's one thing to be frightened by the audacity of predatory people pursuing power, but it's far more frightening that there are people willing to hand it over to them,
Yes.
with very little pressure. And that's the part that I think we need to keep talking about is like, how do we move past platforming these same types of people over and over again across sides? Obviously, there's a lot on the Republican side that I talk about quite often. But like we've mentioned at the DNC, we're seeing that happen time and time again. And it's so unfortunate because there's so many good people out there that are struggling to build campaigns,
Yeah. Well, what I would say on that front too is, and I always like to be hopeful, is this is not separate and apart from fascism and the fight against abuse of power, like obeying in advance, which is what you basically were just illustrating, like supporting someone. Fighting back against all of this is exactly what is required at this time. And so these fights are all connecting. So I think people should take heart if that's a part of what you're having to fight, that you're part of a much bigger battle and it's an important one and it's a worthwhile one. So I think if it were easy for people to hold powerful accountable, we would be in a lot better of a position. And if more people were brave to stand up against their abusers, like a lot of the survivors are that listen to and follow your podcast, then we would be in a much better place as a country. So I'm hopeful in that sense.
No, absolutely. Well, Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I'm sure it won't be the last time that we chat, but I really, really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your time.